Hello, I'm Dr. Clint Sexton, and in this video I want to talk about how inflammation can disrupt thyroid function. Okay, so when we're talking about the thyroid, ultimately what we're talking about is how the body is able to produce energy. So if we're having problems related to thyroid function, we're usually going to experience that in a form. The form will be a decreased level of energy production within the cell. So let's just kind of simplify that concept from there. So let's look at how inflammation can disrupt the regulation of thyroid hormone production through the thyroid, or how that hormone is going to work within the body. Okay, so we'll start at the very top. So your thyroid regulation begins up in your brain, an area called your hypothalamus, and it makes a hormone called TRH. Okay, so we won't get too deep into this, but the whole point is the hypothalamus makes a hormone, and it goes down to the TSH, which is right below, the pituitary gland, which is right below it, and the TRH signals the pituitary gland to make its hormone called TSH. Now we're more familiar with that one. And then the TSH is going to go down to the thyroid gland and tell the thyroid gland to make hormone, T4 hormone. But the point is, if we have inflammation, that can disrupt how the hypothalamus is going to interpret the environment of your body to decide whether it's going to release more or less of this TRH hormone. Okay? Same thing happens down to the pituitary gland. So then let's say your pituitary gland's getting that hormone from the hypothalamus, and now the pituitary has to decide, well, should I make more or less of my hormone, the TSH, to send to the thyroid gland? And inflammation is going to play a role in that. And one of the ways this happens is hormone gets converted within these tissues. So meaning thyroid hormone will go into the pituitary gland, and through certain enzymes, it gets turned into the active form of thyroid hormone. Increased inflammation can disrupt how those enzymes work. So basically what we're saying is that inflammation can kind of blind the regulatory organs, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, blind them to the actual state of thyroid hormone levels in the body, and inflammation can do that. So then we'll travel on down to the thyroid gland itself. If we have increased inflammation, it can have a negative impact on the enzymes involved there, one of those being the TPO enzyme, and that's involved in the production of the thyroid hormone itself. So again, this inflammation can disrupt the regulation. It can also disrupt the production directly at the thyroid gland. Now after that, this is how inflammation continues to change what we're seeing with our thyroid status. So then another variable is how thyroid hormone gets converted to its active form. So most of your hormone that's produced is called T4, and that's technically an inactive form of hormone. That needs to get converted into the active form called T3. And certain enzymes do this again. These are called deiodinase enzymes, all right? But when we have increased inflammation, it can disrupt how those enzymes work. So what could result is you could have enough T4 production, but not enough conversion to the active form, and that's T3. So that's not really a thyroid problem, because the thyroid has done its job, okay? It just has to make the 4. It has to make T4. That's its job, okay? Now we're looking for all the other breakdowns that can occur, and in this case, in how inflammation can cause that. Another thing that happens is that when the body's under more stress or inflammatory stress, that conversion of T4 to T3 it goes two ways. All right, one is it makes the T3 that active hormone that we like, but when we see more inflammation in the body, we tend to see that it makes more of what's called RT3, or reverse T3. So that's a form of T3 that's not active. It doesn't do the things that thyroid hormone does for our cells. So we're kind of getting more of a type of hormone, this reverse T3, that we don't really want. Okay. So again, we're talking about the regulation of the thyroid, things occurring within the thyroid itself, and then what happens to the thyroid hormone after it's produced by the thyroid and let out into the rest of the system. Other things we run into is that we're following this down. Okay, so now we can get into, well, inflammation can have a negative impact on how thyroid hormone interacts with receptors at the cell, at the level of the cell. Okay, so this hormone has to get to the cell, it has to get into the cell, and it has to react with the internal environment of that cell for it to do what it needs to do. Inflammation makes that worse. Okay, it gets more muddied in a sense. We don't get the efficient energy production that we want from this thyroid hormone. So it goes all the way from the top down, all the way from the level of regulation to the top in the brain, all the way down to the level of the cell. We can go even further. Let's go further into the cell. And this hormone is going to influence the structures that actually make your energy. All right, and those are called mitochondria. If you have increased inflammation, or also what we call increased oxidative stress or free radicals, we'll just put those together in this case, it's going to greatly decrease the efficiency of how these mitochondria can even make the energy, which is what we're trying to get to anyway. Okay, remember, because when we're talking about thyroid, we're talking about energy production. We're talking about metabolism, and underneath that, ultimately, we're talking about energy production within the cell, and that occurs within the cell at the mitochondria. So the point is that when you're trying to evaluate what's going on with thyroid, you have to look at all these ways of just how inflammation can disrupt what's happening in the body. Because some of your very basic tests, and if you do the basic thyroid testing, let's say you get a TSH test and maybe an FT4 or what's called a free T4, you're looking at one little piece, one little glimpse of this overall environment. So you want to do enough testing with the thyroid so you can see, well, do we have a thyroid problem or not? Or does it look like the problems we're seeing are being caused by something external to these main fine points of control, meaning following the regulation down from the brain, hypothalamus, to the pituitary gland, to the thyroid gland. We have to look at the steps going down through that, as well what happens after that hormone leaves the thyroid and how that's going to interact with our cells. So this gives you an idea of how inflammation can throw a wrench in the works of how your thyroid hormone is going to work, how the thyroid is going to function, and how this is ultimately going to affect your metabolism and your ability to produce energy. So you can evaluate inflammation with some testing. A good test is called a CRP, C-reactive protein. I prefer the high sensitivity version of that. Other tests that aren't quite as specific but can still give you some insight is something called ESR. We call it a SED rate. And another test that can pick up inflammation is something called a ferritin. Now, ferritin, we use this to evaluate iron or iron reserves in the body, but it can also reflect inflammatory responses in the body. So there's a few ways to evaluate this inflammation, but it's good to have this kind of information when you're looking at the thyroid and trying to determine where the breakdown is occurring in this whole web of thyroid health, metabolism, and energy production. If you'd like to see more details on the points of this inflammation, how it affects the thyroid, you can check out the blog. You can get more information on this at the website as well. I hope you found this helpful. And again, when you're looking at thyroid function, you look at the thyroid, you have to look at what's going out beyond the thyroid to see where these problems actually lie. Hope you found this helpful. Thank you.